And we are live. All right, so we are doing part two of Jacques Rancière's hatred of democracy. This time I didn't get to go to the meeting at all, so I'm flying in blind here. So
Okay.
how did it go in the meeting?
There was about five of us there.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, there was a bit of a discussion at the various times. Yeah. Okay,
Well, I
so a
guess
lot
so.
of what
So
I.
take me through it as if I
Okay,
was a first timer.
so just off the start, yeah, everybody knows I'm a politician, but according to Jacques Rancière, I'm probably one of the, well, everybody, any politician out there is a corrupt politician. Essentially, if,
You're one of the bad guys.
yeah, absolutely, from his perspective. Um, Anybody who ran, like who sought their position, is already corrupted from an individual perspective because they have a um, a special interest, a personal private interest in getting reelected and getting their wage and getting the ego boost that comes from being treated specially,
And the
that kind of stuff,
power,
and
yeah.
the power. Yes. So that's his first definition, which we covered last time, of democracy is the coming together in equality for the common good. So it's immediately corrupted if you're there for your own personal benefits, as in you're getting a wage, you're getting an ego boost, um, you have an agenda. If you have any of those things, you're already a corrupt individual. Now, in this section, we're going to be looking more at the system itself as opposed to the individual people in it, although the individuals are the ones that are causing the problems. So, again, just to recap from last time, the new hatred of democracy is not aimed at institutions per se, such as elections or um, voting and that kind of stuff. It's already corrupted those. It's aimed rather at the democratic expression that people want, from time to time, want to express. And the best democracy, according to the haters, is one that actually keeps the democratic impulse of the people at bay. Now we're going to find out what that is today.
Yeah, their version of democracy, what they think of as democracy, is in reality a kind of democracy that
We
that
have today.
limits real democracy.
Yes, and that would be what we have today in the world.
Okay.
And that's pretty much every country, from the United States to North Korea. They're all democracies of some kind. They're all corrupt.
Sounds to me like a bourgeois democracy.
Well, even North Korea, which may not be considered bourgeois, is a type of democracy that's pretty corrupt.
All right, fine. You got a point. You got a point there.
Mhm.
Wait,
So,
but they don't run for office in North Korea, do they?
they do. So my understanding of how it works over there is the
Oh yeah, you lived
party.
in Korea.
Yeah, well, North Korea, or not North Korea, but
Yeah.
talking about North Korea, the party, the Workers' Party, recommends a nominee or a candidate for a particular district,
Okay.
and he needs to get here. It's always a he actually, so he needs to get 95% or higher approval from the people there. If he doesn't, he's replaced. So it's a type of democracy in which people confirm the leader, and his job then is to represent their interests to the parliament. But also, it goes the other way to explain the reasoning of the parliament to the people. Uh,
Okay.
so, in that sense, it is a type of democracy. I mean, you're voting for somebody to confirm that they're acceptable to you, and if he's not acceptable to you, they replace him.
So
You
lot
lose
of
it.
parallels to bourgeois democracy.
You could say that's why they call themselves the People's Republic, right?
Yeah.
Democratic Republic. So, um, yeah, so today we're going to look more at the institutions and some of the things that we take for granted and think that they are democratic when they are perhaps just democratic in name only. So, one of the things he starts off by saying is that democratic society is never anything but an imaginary portrayal designed to support this or that principle of good government. Designed in principle, but not really. So, um, continuing on, societies today, as yesterday, are organized by the play of oligarchies. Government is always exercised by the minority over the majority, and the power of the people is therefore necessarily also what he calls heterotopic, meaning occurring in an abnormal place to the people who actually run it. So they pay lip service to the will of the people, but they are not the people. They're not the will of the people, because the second that they become, I'm talking elected officials here, elected, they have privileges that separate them from the people.
Yeah, makes sense so far.
So far, okay. Okay, so part of the problem is the corruption in the quest for good democratic government. The way we're looking at it is already off from the wrong foot. So we often start off by comparing an ideal form of democracy in which everybody votes. Everybody has an interest in the political forces that are playing out, and everybody would take a vote and decide on a particular way of doing it. But we're often told that because of the size of our country and the number of people, we can't get them all into the same room. We need to have representation. And they put these two poles: perfect democracy, the ideal in which everybody participates and votes, and then representative democracy in which somebody does it for them. And the ideal of good government is finding the right balance between the electoral laws and the powers of those representatives. Have you ever heard this before?
What?
The idea that we can't have perfect democracy because it's just functionally impossible, so we need representation.
Yeah. That's. I mean, if a teacher asked that in grade school, that's probably what everybody would say.
Yes, he says that's nonsense. It's not true, not historically true. It's not accurate description of it, and it's pointing us in the wrong direction, leading us to an oligarchic state, which actually is destroying democracy.
So okay, so let me make a make an anarchist point.
Yeah.
They in Argentina, when workers seized some factories and tried to set up systems of perfect democracy, what they found was in fact that a lot of the workers who weren't kind of the managers, or the workers who hadn't been the more skilled or the managers ahead of time, ended up feeling kind of out of place at the meetings and ended up stopped going, and also thought there was too many meetings.
Probably.
Even though they had the rights to like perfect democracy, things ended up falling back into kind of the tiered hierarchies.
Yes.
Yeah.
That will happen. That is a constant struggle. So what he's going to say, we'll cover it a little bit later, is that democracy is a constant struggle. Any victory that you get is going to be short-lived, and you need that democratic struggle to continue forever, essentially.
So it has to be thought of as a permanent struggle, something you're
Yes.
working on all the time.
You never reach an ideal system, because the oligarchs. Actually, I guess this will lead into the next paragraph. The oligarchs function in a desire to control. They want their power to expand, in a sense, and they're continually striving to limit democracy. This is a natural and almost necessary tendency of any oligarchic system, and this stems from the 6 titles that he talks about democracy fighting against. So there's titles against the highborn versus lowborn, rich versus poor, old over young. There's father figures. Those are the father figures. Then there's the shepherd figures, the capable or the knowledgeable over those who don't know or are not experienced.
So that would be the factory setting.
Yeah, or the strong against the weak. All of these are titles that legitimate a type of rule. And in our world, what he calls an imperfect or a corrupted system, it's basically the oligarchs fighting about which title is going to dominate at any one particular time. Democracy throws a wrench into that. It puts chance into that and completely subverts or severs the link between title of any kind and the privilege of ruling. In a democratic system that he's describing, the chance supervenes all of that. So a democratic struggle can, if it desires to, stop and reverse any expert or strong man or old man or highborn person. That's the essence. We still have a little bit of that because in theory, anybody can run for office and anybody can win. But here's the problem: once you win, you become part of that elite oligarchy, because that's what the system creates in our world today. You get that because A, you're being paid, you get special treatment, you get special privileges, and you're seeking re-election. Any one of those things corrupts you individually, but the system makes it that way.
Interesting. So yeah, there's lots of different kinds of socialists, communists, and anarchists who all have some version of a system, a democratic system they'd set up. Some of which incorporate the idea of random leaders or random representatives. But some don't too. So is he suggesting this is the only possible way to do it?
No, he's saying that these are the reasons why ours are corrupted. As we'll see, the struggle continues and must change. So, because the elites and the oligarchs and the institutions want to make things normalized, they want to rationalize things. They want to. He calls it a police logic, where they want ideally the best from their perspective to happen, and the best keeps getting better and better. They will continually subvert the democratic struggle and any victories that the democratic struggle gets. It can take time, it can take a lot of time, or take a little bit of time depending on what the actual victory is. So one example of a victory that he saw was the suffrage movement, getting women to vote. That was a great victory for democracy. However, in a sense, it was subverted in the fact that so few people actually vote because they're distracted, through entertainment, through having to work, or through having lack of engagement. They don't see any benefit to it. These are all techniques by which the ruling class insists on maintaining their ruling ability within a quote-unquote, traditionally, what we have today, a democratic system where the institutions are not challenged, but the expression is.
Okay.
Okay, that was easy. Okay.
Sounds. Fair enough.
Okay, so one of the things he points out is the notion of voting is very different from what it originally meant. If you were the leader, say, of a pirate gang or a highwayman troop or something like that, it was very democratic because the leader sought the consent of those he governed.
Pirates.
Anybody who technically was an outlaw, right, who was fighting against the organized kingdom or anything like that, they tended to be much more democratic. So Grayberry pirates of the sort of the Mediterranean and that kind of stuff. But the point of voting in those days was to get the consent of those who were part of it. So you had to vote, and it had to be unanimous, similar to sort of like what North Korea was. The stronger power was demanding unanimity from the followers, and there was a risk there. If he didn't get the unanimity, it would be very bad for him, for the leader. At the same time, if somebody withheld support for the leader, it would also be very bad for him. Does that make sense? So the leader needs unanimity in order to captain the ship. And if somebody rebels, that's a major, it's a risk for, say, the captain, if he's demanding the consent of his people, if he doesn't get it. At the same time, it's dangerous for the individual who rebels against the captain to not give the anonymity, right? So it was a high-stakes game. You needed voting was to give consent as opposed to determine leaders, because there is no equality of power between people. There may be in an ideal world, but in our world, you pretty much got to be rich, titled, educated, to run for office.
Now, so is he concerned with equality?
Yes, that is in fact okay. Well, that's the first definition of democracy. You have to come together in equality, not two words there, in, separate word, equality, for the common good. If you take that away, you're already corrupting it. So that's sort of what we covered last time. That's the first corruption of democracy, is where you take away the equality. So an increase in equality is always a good victory for the democratic struggle.
Okay, so is he means equality in terms of authority and wealth, because there's other kinds of ways people can not be equal
Yes.
in the society, right?
So yes, that's the nature of humanity. We're all different in that respect. But when you come together in equality for the sake of the common good, it's similar to one vote, one person, one vote. You can corrupt that by fake news or sponsoring a whole bunch of advertising, in which case the person with money is actually more than one vote, but the principle stays the same. So what we're trying to do is create equality for those coming together in search of the common good. If you do that, you don't pay them. They shouldn't want to be there, in a sense. It's like jury duty, right?
Right. They're doing They're doing it for duty, for community, for selflessness or whatever.
Yeah, but not for any private interest.
Not for private interest.
That's the corruption. Yes. So
Sir,
the equality.
Go ahead.
The equality is in that they don't have any private interest, or they shouldn't. Once you put that in, you're creating an unequal situation.
Okay.
So
as soon as you allow for a position to create a private interest. Then.
Exactly. So take a look at it. The analogy is with a jury. It doesn't matter if you're technically rich or poor when you enter a jury. That equality is irrelevant. The equality is you're both unrelated to the people whom you are judging, right? If you have a personal stake in that, like it's your mother or your father who's on trial, you should not be on the jury. In a similar way, those in government should not have a personal stake in this, or a private stake. Everybody has a personal stake. It shouldn't be a private stake, as in, oh, I'm going to figure out a way to make money out of this, or gain prestige, or anything else that might be private. You're looking for the common good. And the jury analogy is an example. You don't want somebody who's got an agenda there, or I want to find him guilty. I don't care. I want to find the tobacco company's guilty, or whoever it is, right?
Right.
That would be inappropriate, but that's what we live in today.
Sir Piffington in the chat says, "You sound like you're in outer space."
I am supporting this guy. So okay, just to be clear, I am, to the best of my knowledge, to the best of my ability, I'm supporting this particular writer. Whether I
No. I mean, like literally, you sound like you're in outer space, like your microphone.
I'm sorry, it's the only microphone I have.
Yeah. So
maybe I'll talk closer to the computer mic. Is that better?
No, it's like, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's like electric-y sound and kind of muffled. It's the best it's gonna get.
Okay. I will invest again. I think I said that last time and I didn't get around to it.
Yeah, check out Canada Computer or Staples or something.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so voting is the way we consider voting as to achieve to determine which way to do things is not the way what voting was for. Voting was for the consent of the universal consent of weaker parties to the superior party. And what we're doing when we say, okay, in a more traditional voting mechanism, if everybody doesn't agree, you don't really do anything. Here, if everybody doesn't agree, that's considered normal. He sees that as a corruption. What we should be looking for is the common good. And
so we should be looking for consensus, is what he's saying?
More than consensus, unanimity. If it's not, okay, so assuming that you don't have private interests involved, the common interest is much easier to see.
Yeah. Like different classes are kind of the main thing. And there's lots of different subdivisions of classes, right?
Yes.
You can imagine, but that's the main thing, like dividing people's interests and kind of dividing people into political groups and categories.
Yes, and that's part of those. You can have them, you can still have them, but the point is that the people who are leading shouldn't actually want to be there. So I
So it
should
be
be
like a
disqualified
chore.
because I wanted this job.
So it should be like a chore, like jury
It
duty.
should be a bit like a chore, yes.
But,
Um,
but wouldn't people in a society like that, people would kind of see it as an honor to be, I don't know,
do
get
you
that
feel
position?
like to be honored to be chosen for jury duty?
No, but that's because I live under capitalism, where that would be boring as hell, and and I'd be contributing to a shitty system. Whereas in a perfect democracy, like Jacques describes, um,
He doesn't go as far as to say it's a perfect
okay,
democracy.
okay,
There's just better and worse democracies,
all right,
and it's a
fair enough.
constant struggle. I mean, the struggle necessitates new and different techniques at every step of the way. So one of the things that he suggests, he doesn't say this outright, but um, well, I'll say it here. Okay, the um, part of the meaning of democracy is that the juridical political forms of state constitutions and laws never rest upon one and the same logic. And as we go through for that is the impression I'm getting is you got to change your voting system. Um, First past the post is great. When it's new, it gets old. Proportional representation is great when it's new. It gets old. You can't have the same one because that is a form of corruption. Uh,
Wait, oh, okay.
like you can see how
Ranked
okay,
choice and basically all the different versions of
all of
democratic.
them when they're new tend to be better than what was old, but they get old, and part of the reason is that the elites learn and benefit from it, and they try
They
and
find ways to rig it and to make it benefit them.
precise it. So part of the democratic struggle means continuous change in that respect.
Those damn elites. They're always up to no good.
Um, well, that's the funny thing. It's from their perspective, they are up to good. So they follow a police logic. The police logic that he describes is one based on a perceived good,
Right.
and
Oh,
not
they think they're
necessarily the
good.
common good, but their own personal good. It's
Or
already
keeping
corrupted.
order.
Yes, keeping order is one, for example. And in that sense, they want to prescribe to other people things and impose upon them things that may not necessarily be in their best interest, or
Like jail.
like jail, yes. But it can also be what some things that we would consider good: public health, vaccinations, and that kind of stuff.
Right, okay.
So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be bad. The point is, or the test is, whether it increases or decreases equality.
So wait, so how do vaccines figure into equality?
Well, he doesn't. Oh, that was my example. Um,
Okay.
but as a, if we all have if we all have if we have enough people taking vaccines and we have herd immunity, the common good is benefited there, right? So it's not too hard to see that vaccines are a good thing. The bad thing is that, hey, I don't want to be told that I have to have a shot, kind of stuff, right?
Right,
It's sort of an
it's the
imposition on
policing
a
aspect.
person's free. Yeah.
The
So
policing aspect.
um, the elites, he is not saying that they have to get gotten rid of. The bureaucracy doesn't need to be gotten rid of. It needs to be kept. We have to understand that its naturally desire, its natural tendencies, as it's doing its job, is to limit and reduce the democratic struggle and oppose the democratic struggle, which he sees as bad, but necessary. So it's important that the democratic struggle continues to be struggled or continue to work, continue to be manned or enlivened.
Right, right. We don't just make it and then leave it alone and let it
Exactly.
work on its own.
That is the that is the that is the that is the trap that many people fall in. We found if we're going to find the final way to do things. No, you're never going to find the final way. You're going to find a better way than is being done. And part of the reason it's better is because what's being done gets slowly corrupted over time. And it becomes worse and worse.
This is he's making a very sneaky Marxist argument.
Okay.
Like this is what exactly what Marxists say about why social democracy can never work. Because no matter you can get all the free healthcare, free childcare, pharmacare, You can have the best social safety net in the world, have everyone taken care of, but as long as the capitalist class is left intact and the class system and capitalist production are left intact, over time, no matter what, these things will start to erode, and the capitalist class will find ways to chip away at them, as they have, even in Scandinavia.
Mm-hmm. Yes. He doesn't quote it, but I suspect he would agree with, I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said that the liberty requires um, the blood of tyrants and patriots every so often or something like that.
Thomas Jefferson?
I think so. Some American guy who didn't quite agree with the Constitution, I think it was written, was saying something about you need constant revolution, you need revolutionary
Right,
change over time.
yes, yeah, I think that sounds
He's of
familiar.
that opinion too, but it doesn't necessarily need to be violent with the blood of patriots and stuff like that. You just need to put the oligarchs in their place and stop it.
Right.
So, what were we here? So he sees the adoption of universal suffrage as a positive. Um, it, Today, it's less effective because so many few people actually vote because they're being distracted, and that's one of the ways those media can be used to distract people. Same with consumer choice. If you improve the number of consumer choices, they feel that they're free when they're only limiting it to only consumer choices. That's pretty standard all over the world. So what he's saying, though, is that it's because of this changing when we're continually the need to continually change the system, continually change the processes, continually adjust things. Um, he's going to contrast that as the public sphere, where these things are in contention, and when the bureaucracy wants to have fewer and fewer things in contention by finding solutions to them. And once they found a solution to them, they want to keep that solution. And in keeping that solution, that's where the public sphere is shrunk and needs to be reawakened, and those solutions need to be revisited. That is that constant struggle that will need to be happening. So if somebody ever tells you that we found the final solution, then we found the
Well,
best
no,
solution for something, we have to understand that it's the best solution. It may be the best solution for our time now, but it will not be a permanent solution. And we must expect changes in the future.
that's
Yeah.
what you just said is heresy in the United States regarding the Constitution.
Yes.
That's the final ultimate document. Can't ever be changed.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Perfect. Written perfectly.
they should have listened to Thomas Jefferson and have a couple more revolutions every 20 years or something like that.
Yeah.
So now this. Okay, so the oligarchs are trying to close this public sphere. Just to be clear, the public sphere is not necessarily um, an increase in the bureaucracy or the public sector. It may or may not be. It depends on the notion of the quality, whether it's growing or decreasing. So a union that makes it that gets the 7-day work week reduced to 5 days has improved the equality and the standard of living for everybody. A union, on the other hand, that gets a different deal for senior members versus junior members is working against the democratic struggle because it's creating inequality even within itself. So he's saying that the social movements that improve the world can also work against democracy at any time. So unions have been a very good thing, but they can also sometimes do the bad thing. So I believe it's the United Auto Workers right now who have set up a 2-tier union membership. Very bad, but it's probably because they've um, they've uh, they've been corrupted by keeping certain things that should have been changed in the past. So it may not all be their fault, but he would see that as a corruption of a good social movement. A social movement must increase equality, and there's a natural disinequality that's being created as you fix things into place over a long period of time.
Fair.
Okay, well, that was easy too.
I mean that's what happened to every communist revolution, right? They started off with democratic ideas, and then never gave up the state, and just got more autocratic and dictatorial,
Yeah.
and never let go.
Yes, that would be. That's an example. Yeah. Well, yeah, they never gave up the power. So, power needs to be changed, and the system that goes with it needs to be changed. So, the way that we have it now, the system doesn't change much. That's
Right.
the problem. The system needs to be able to change. So, I suspect that he would support the idea of right now, because we've been in a very long period of time with first past the post. We need to move over to something else like proportional representation. Also understanding that in 5, maybe 20 or 30 years or a generation later, proportional representation will also be corrupted.
Well, wait. If he's saying things need to be constantly, we should be doing constant revolution on these on democracy, or constantly working at it. But he also said that randomizing democracy solves this problem. So why wouldn't we just skip right ahead to that step, and then it sounds like we wouldn't have to do much more work after that in terms of change.
Then you would have fallen into the trap that he wants us to avoid, because again, the very tendencies of the power elite, the people who are actually managing the government and the society, naturally want stability and order. That stability and order is antithetical to the democratic struggle, because it naturally creates differences. We're all different. Some of us have different
Oh,
capacities and capabilities, and we're going to become more and more unequal the more the rules stay the same, because those of us who are smarter will game the system. Those of us who are not so smart, or who don't catch up, or don't catch on, will fall behind. So you change the rules for the sake of equality.
right. Okay. So the only piece of the puzzle that he is missing is the overthrow of class systems and the abolishing of, because as soon as you get rid of class, then you no longer have this problem of private interests. If everybody's interests are shared, a
Oh,
socialist society,
so
in a real one,
mhm.
then you don't
so
have. Go ahead.
So that's never going to last for very long. So yes, we all might have the same common interests, and they can be identified when you take out the private interests, and you work on that. But once anything is set, policies have to be set. Those who are um, most capable will start to benefit from those more, creating the inequality. Now, he doesn't say that's necessarily a bad thing. It's bad in the extreme, when we see huge levels of inequality, and that's when things need to change. So, um, inequality, when it becomes structuralized and perpetuates more and more inequality, that's when things need to change. But inequality in and of itself is natural and can't be eliminated. To eliminate it is like to put yourself against nature and to say, because everybody's different sizes, we're going to chop them all into the right size, right? That's just beyond the pale. So he doesn't want to go that far. He doesn't want to make us all equal. He just wants to make sure that those of us who um, are exploiting some and or condemning or putting some down, or benefiting unjustly from some things, become evened out. And that's the injustice part is critical, and that's why the common good is necessary. So it may be the fact that we're all different sizes is not an injustice in and of itself. The fact that some of us have greater mental capacities than others is not an injustice in itself. It's a part of our diversity. The fact that you have, say, a greater mental capacity and have therefore benefited more in a particular system and ways of doing something, that part can be the injustice. If you are, in fact, doing it on the backs of many others. Now, those deals that are made at the very beginning may sound fair, but as the deal as it progresses, you can see that you're being exploited. That's when things need to change, and that's when the democracy needs to continue to struggle for more equality. Because a lot of this inequality, when a new change is made, a lot of the inequality can't be seen right away. It has to emerge because we're all individuals, and each of our lives creates opportunities that are not envisioned and can't be envisioned by people who aren't in them. Is there another question then?
It all makes sense.
Okay. Okay. So the oligarchy as a class, they're not evil. They're just doing their job, and their job requires them to essentially, okay, in their purest form, I should say, their job requires them to set standards and to try and make the world a better place through a certain police logic.
Police
In
logic.
the worst case, yeah, the police logic meaning prescriptive.
Right, okay.
Okay. That's his term. It's an unusual one, I find, but it's, or at least the translator of his term. In the best case scenario, it's not bad. In the worst case scenario, it's very corrupting, and that's what we have to guard against. But it's also, at least in the best case scenario, necessary for society to continue. So what does he say next? The fundamental difference between supporting dominant interests and or social movements is the degree of equality or inequality created as a result of that between the members there. And dispute, so he gives an example. Disputes over salaries were, above all, disputes about deprivatizing the wage relation. About these deprivatizing the wage relation. It's about proclaiming that it was a public matter affecting the collectivity, and as a result, something that ought to come within the domain of collective action, public discussion, and legislative regulation. So when you increase equality and the betterment of the society, you're doing something good for the society, such as improving healthcare, all those things that you mentioned, pharmacare, dental care, and all that stuff. These are improvements to the society, and they should be regulated so that there's no exploitation, so that there's no injustice, but understanding that there will creep in that over time, and so things may need to change.
So the understanding has to be built into the system.
Say again?
So the understanding that things will creep in, bad elements will creep in, or authoritarian elements will creep in, has to be built into the system somehow.
Yes. Yes. And if you don't build it in, you get stagnation, ossification, and perpetual increases and separations of haves and have-nots in whatever domain it is.
Sounds like every society on Earth.
Yes. And so that's the fundamental problem, is that people have assumed that they can get an answer for all time when you cannot.
Right.
Now, he goes on to say that there are two insidious techniques that the oligarchic powers seek to dominate democracy through a logic of redistribution of the public and private spheres. So these two are, first, separation of public and private. The notion that you have a private life is very appealing to a lot of people, partly because two reasons. If you have a lot more than others, you don't have to know that, so you have a certain deniability, and they don't know that, so you're safe from them attacking you and redistributing your wealth.
Taking your stuff.
Yes, and the same happens for those above you. So there's a certain taboo-ness. You don't ask, how big is your bank account? How much are you making, right? And there's non-disclosure acts. So if you're a woman, you tend to make, 80% of what men do, but you can't tell anybody that because you signed a non-disclosure thing, right? We're giving you a special deal, 20% less than the average, right? We don't tell them that. That kind of privacy is detrimental to equality. So the separation, the line that demarcates the separation between private and public is skewed in our world far too much in the direction of the private, meaning we have too much privacy that is interfering with our ability to recognize equality. So oftentimes people are told, homeless people, it's their choice. I mean, why can't they get a job? Well, that's a very foolish way to look at it, but I hear it. It's a common thing. I mean, it might be harder if there were less privacy to accept that. And
Less
that's,
privacy to accept that.
or sorry, to accept that notion that it's that homelessness is a lifestyle choice would be harder to accept if there were less privacy. For example, everybody
Oh,
knew what everybody's bank account were or was,
okay, yeah,
right?
okay.
So
Yes.
we
Like,
value
well,
privacy.
you could almost call it secrecy.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Secrecy might be a better word. Privacy is still considered a very good
Yeah.
word. Um, so anyway, the separation between the private sphere and the public sphere uh, is skewed way too far and needs to change. Um, there's a lot of privacy that is to our detriment and to the detriment of equality in our society.
Right.
What that is needs to be determined at each step of the way for the common good. But it's not going to happen because we have, at least not in our society, because we're all corrupted by private individuals.
Right. And I mean, even governments, our public institutions are very much private. You know, government, uh, prime ministers meet, cabinet meetings happen behind closed doors.
Oh, I got a story for you on the next point. Yes, actually, that sort of leads to the next point. So, the first insidious thing was the division of private and public, and where that line is. But the second one is got to do with um, the idea that you could purify the public from any private interest. So we have laws, conflict of interest laws. We say um, if you go this far, you've gone too far. But if you don't go this far, you're okay. So I'm paid for my job. Well, that's a private interest, but it's deemed okay.
Yeah.
Um, I'm
Minimum.
treated with a little bit of higher dignity and higher respect as a result of my position. Well,
If you own, say, a bunch of hotel chains and golf courses.
even so much more. Yes, this this is a lie. There is a private interest in everything, is what he's claiming, and to say that we can take it out is a lie.
So, okay, and then the way to negate private interests is to do this randomized democracy thing.
Yeah, yeah, in a sense. But okay, the story I was going to tell you was just last day in council. We had to decide on whether we would have a closed meeting investigator also be advising us on policy issues, the legal issues of policy. Now, if you're guilty, you always want to have the judge in your corner. Yes?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, but that would be a bit of a corruption of law, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
So, fortunately, council saw that that was, and so we are not going to have the same legal firm advise us as will be judging us.
Oh, wow.
Oh, you saw that right away, right? So,
Yeah,
for a while there, we were. Unfortunately, that changed.
really. So the people advising you were the same people approving the.
No, not approving, but if there was ever an investigation into something that they advised us on,
It'd be
they
them.
could they could be investigating themselves. Yes.
Well, I mean, that's almost what happens with police unions. They basically investigate themselves. They have an overarching body, but it's like it's still police run.
Oh, okay, I see. Yeah. So anyway, in the case of the this particular law firm, they did. We challenged this like two councils ago or two council sessions ago, and they came back with a whole detailed report of how they were going to avoid conflict of interest. But the principle was still there. They would be judging us and advising us, and that seemed to a majority of council that we probably shouldn't mix those two. Fortunately, in my opinion. So um, that was a democratic struggle, and it won. But creative minds will find ways around that, and that's essentially what he's saying. Why we need to have eternal vigilance and continue to fight for this equality at every step of the way, because you can't purify the public realm in our world from any private interest. As long as you're paying people, as long as you're giving them extra anything, including ego boosting recognition, you can't. And in addition to that, all the rules that you put in there are just showing that some is acceptable and some is not, and they're going to be mixing and matching that over time. So
Right. Right.
Yeah. One of the other things that he points out is that there's another social lie that we tell ourselves. Where is it here? It's identifying the figure of the property owner with the public man. Here's the lie. This property owner is capable of elevating himself above the petty interests of economic and social life. Right? The idea is if you're rich, you don't need any more money, so you can make informed decisions for the public good. Because you don't have to worry about money.
Of course.
Yes. So that he claims is a typical assumptive lie that we have in our world today. And it's played out by the fact that if you happen to be a property owner, you have a much greater chance of getting elected than if you're not a property owner. The ability to have property affords you the time and space and money to run for office much more successfully than if you happen to have a working class job where you have to actually work 9 to 5.
Yeah.
So that, but anybody who has money is usually concerned about losing it or making more. That's the truth of it. So a property man is not necessarily a good public man.
Or better than anyone else.
Yeah, exactly. They're not better than anyone else. So when you stick a person that has private interests into a position of public trust, there's no such time when such a person is pure.
Right. It's like all these billionaires running for president.
Yes, exactly. They're not necessarily. They may claim. Oh, in fact, I seem to recall Trump saying something like, oh, "Just trust me. I won't do anything bad."
Well, right. His big argument was that he didn't need to take donor money. He didn't need to solicit money from other people. In fact, so he was kind of making the argument that Jacques was talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because he didn't have to campaign for it or vie for that position.
Yes.
Even though he did, but he didn't take money-wise. He didn't have to.
That's right. Yes. And interestingly enough, he won. So it's much easier if you can self-fund. So another issue that he brings up is naming. When you name somebody, you attach to them expectations. Like a position, for example, counselor or man or police officer
titles.
doctor, yeah, those kind of titles. When you name somebody, you attribute to them a certain responsibility, some expectations that limit their ability to function. It standardizes what's expected of them and what they're supposed to do. This again is a type of limiting of democracy, which is trying to find equality. Yeah, creating difference. It actually creates differences. This is one of the things that he says is not helpful. Labeling people is never helpful. Well, I shouldn't say never. It is not helpful for democratic struggle. New labels might be for a time. They get old. So here's his last quote for today is that this is what the democratic process implies. The action of subjects who, by working the intervals between identities, so you're fudging the boundaries. So those are the intervals between identities. They reconfigure the distribution of the public and the private. Again, that line that separates public and private needs to be changed constantly. Well, maybe not constantly, but from time to time. They reconfiguring the distribution of the public and the private, the universal and the particular. Democracy really means, in this sense, the impurity of politics. If you think you've figured it out, you've probably corrupted it. There's a certain impurity that needs to be maintained. You push the envelope in many cases, you break the envelope in many cases, but you're still looking for the public or the common good.
Right.
But if you're breaking the envelope or you're pushing the boundaries for personal gain, for personal interest, you're corrupting the system.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And so we have one more chapter in that book. That's what we're doing. So the purpose of democracy, it's a process, it's a struggle for greater equality. And if you're fighting against equality or you're creating inequality, you may be standardizing, you may be simplifying things, but you're fighting against democracy. So again, democracy is not necessarily attached to a particular form of government. Even totalitarian, even what we would traditionally call non-democratic state kingdoms or constitutional monarchies or anything like that, they can be democratic, just as certainly as a nominally democratic state that has elections and stuff like that may not be very democratic. I suspect that what he's saying is that the United States is not very democratic.
Or Russia.
Russia might have been more democratic back in the 90s, but they were also corrupt.
Very corrupt.
Yes. Well, from his perspective, in the sense that they allowed a lot of personal interest involved. But the new elections that were started, like with Gorbachev and all that, may have been more, might have been a better thing, but they were corrupted pretty quickly. So there's other factors that go in there. So when something is new and unknown, there's a certain egalitarianism in that people are starting from the same foot in a new way of doing things.
Right, and the elite don't quite know how to master or work the system yet.
Yes, exactly. So as the race begins, they all start pulling ahead. Some start pulling ahead, some start pulling back. It's at that point that you need to well, maybe not right at that point, but when it becomes too obvious, you renormalize it. So, for example, my son's basketball team, if one team is beating the other team just horrendously, they stop taking score because it's clear, right?
Yeah.
You're not supposed to embarrass them. You're not supposed to make people feel too bad about it. You're just supposed to see who wins, right? But if the victory is just so overwhelming that it could make them feel like really, really bad, you just stop counting and you declare them the winner and you finish the game, but the score is like somewhere out there. And it doesn't have to be known, it's just clear that they would have won. The same is true with any new change. Yes, everybody starts from scratch. There will always, because there's always differences, people will always excel and some people will fall behind. The people who will fall behind need to be taken care of in a sense, maybe changing the system again. And then you reset the people again at zero essentially and let them race again in a metaphorical sense.
And that's the last chapter?
No, that's the second last chapter. There's one chapter more and we will do that in 2 weeks.
Okay. So, how does this chapter, or how do the first 2 chapters, how can they inform your role as a city councilor in government?
So sometimes we have to tell staff not to do what they suggest is best. We have to, like, they can say, here's all the logic, here's all the physics, here's all the regulations, and we may have to say no. So last council, like last term, it was very difficult to do that. Nobody wanted to vote against staff. This time, not yesterday, but 2 times ago, we passed 2 motions that actually overrode the recommendations of staff on things that are not normally considered a good thing to do. So one person wanted a stop sign where all the regulations and the rules and stuff said you don't need one there. The people wanted one there, so we put one there, and we got that passed. I was very happy that there's a trail in my district that the residents wanted stone dust and not to be paved. Staff wanted it paved. It's marginally better if it was paved. Yeah. Staff didn't, or the residents didn't want that, so we went with what the residents wanted. It's a close vote, but the essence of it was, these are 2 trivial little things, but the more serious thing is that the city staff are recognizing, hey, this council is sticking together more on what we would like to see happening in our district over and above regulations and warrants and minimum standards and stuff like that. That is the democratic, that would be the democratic victory there. Now, it will change probably at the next election. We might get tired of doing this, and so becomes less and less.
Are you tired of fighting city staff?
Well, it's not that we're fighting them, right? It's like if the people in my district had not come to me and said, "Hey, we don't want this paved," it would have been paved.
Why did they not want it paved?
It's close. It's better for the environment because stone dust allows water to seep into the land, whereas pavement would run it off. It looks better. It's better for nature, like other animals, and it looks closer to nature, so it's also aesthetic as well. So it's environmental and aesthetic. There's a lot of convenience if you pave it. So when you have to do when trucks have to go back there to fix power poles, for example, paving is just better for the trucks. But it's a marginal thing, right? Also, they wanted it plowed in the wintertime, but it's not necessarily plowed. I mean, in the sense that Lemoyne's Point is stone dust, and that's what people wanted. People still use it in the winter.
Okay, even though it's not plowed.
Yeah. So, was it the right thing to do? From the perspective of city staff, no. It it should have been done differently. From the perspective of the people, they wanted it done differently. In this particular case, council agreed that we should follow the people. It could have gone the other way.
So this was a radical experiment in democracy.
It was not even close. No, it was a minor change in the direction of staff.
Okay.
A major change would be if we got pharmacare.
Or no, a major change would be is if we voted to change the city constitution so that city councilor members were randomly chosen.
That would be an example of something like that. Yes.
Do you guys have the power to make that change?
I don't think so. That we're legislated to have elections.
Is it the province that's?
Yeah, we are creatures of the province, so we only have powers that the province gives us. And one of the things is how we choose our elections. So we're moving to ranked ballots for the next election. How's that going to affect me? I don't know. I've never been in one, so it's going to be harder for me because I'm not. I don't have. I'll have the same amount of experience running that election as any other candidate at the same time. Right. This past one was my second following the same rules as before. It became a little easier. I knew what to expect. Now, anybody who runs against me we will both have the same level of zero experience in a proportional representation system.
Interesting. So yeah, okay. So no one will have a built-in advantage, sort of.
From experience in this case.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of still have an advantage, but.
Yes, the incumbent will always have a small advantage, maybe more or less depending on the actual system. I'm not sure which way it'll be for me if it's more or less at this point. But whoever it is, and I will have zero experience in a ranked ballot system. So, in that sense, it's a more egalitarian race.
But theoretically, Doug Ford could
change that at the last minute. Yes, he could.
could change the system so that municipalities could have randomly chosen councilors and mayors.
Yes, he could. I believe that's within the right of the province.
There we go. That's something to campaign for the next election.
Now, you got to understand that I do have a certain self-interest in not doing that.
Yes, exactly. Corrupted.
From this perspective, yes.
All right, fair. Okay, well, thanks, Jeff. That's we're going to do part 3 in a couple of weeks, then, I guess.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, bye. If there's anybody still in chat, thanks for coming and for watching, and see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks again.
Bye, Jeff.
Bye-bye.
And broadcast.